come up? Yes, that's looks like that's working good. Okay, so welcome. I've seen some of your names before, so if you've been before, it's great to have you back. If this is your first time joining one of these calls, let me tell you a little bit about what will happen. I will introduce myself and then tell you a little bit about the subject matter that we're talking about, which today is the family home. And then we will come to your questions. So feel free while I'm talking to put your questions in the chat box and I will come to them at the end. Obviously, questions about what I'm talking about today, the family home, and what you can do with the family home during divorce proceedings. And then if there's any other questions as well, put them in the chat box and let's see if we've got time to come to those. So usually the session is about 45 to 50 minutes. And I try and cover quite a bit in that time. So bear with me, I do cover quite a bit, but I just want to be able to provide the information that you might need. So while I am just getting ready to obviously present this information to you, would you be able to let me know in the chat box where you're up to in your divorce? You can send it as a direct message, and you can even send your questions as direct messages. So feel free to just pop that in the chat box. Let me know where you're up to. Just because then I am able to gauge who's in the room and make sure that what I'm talking about is relevant to you. So feel free to start putting that there so that I can have a look at that as well. And I'll just get ready to get the information together about the family home and obviously introducing myself. So thank you for already getting that in there. Have filed last November. I'm now in financial negotiations. Yeah, it's quite a difficult time, isn't it? I mean, obviously starting the divorce process is tough in itself, but the finances can be really tricky to resolve. And often that's where people put obstacles in the way. So yes, I do understand that that's such a difficult time for you. And anybody else, feel free to put that in the chat box. So before I start on the content, let me introduce myself. For those of you that haven't been before, you may have come across me, but my name is Bhavna Radia. I am a former family lawyer. Family law was what I wanted to do for many years, and I qualified as a lawyer in my 20s. And I was happily carrying on in practice, just doing my job. Felt like I really understood my clients and I had a level of empathy for people going through divorce proceedings. And you think that you are doing the best job that you can until you go through it yourself and you realize how it feels to actually be in your client's shoes. That happened to me 13 years ago. I went through my own divorce. I realized that I'd been hiding for so long and I should have ended the marriage many years before. But it takes a lot of strength and courage to take that step. And it did take me quite a while to find the strength to move forward. At that point, my children were very young. I have three daughters. One was 9, 6, and 18 months. And so it felt like an even bigger step to take, and it was quite scary. I was full of fear because I'd taken some time off work. So I wasn't working at the time, and we had this great big, huge mortgage to pay, lots of bills, and I just didn't know how I would survive financially, emotionally, bringing up the children. So all of these fears came up for me, and I'm sure lots of you will have the similar fears as well. My mental health really suffered through the process, and I kept thinking, luckily, I have legal knowledge. Luckily, I can do all of this myself, so there's no expense to me in going through divorce. So I was very fortunate that I didn't have to spend money in preparing for this or going through the process. And it led me, when I was on the other side, it led me to think about all these people that actually don't have that knowledge. How could I help? And since then, I've set up my own business, and I now help people to get divorced in a way that's holistic and empowering and a fixed fee, so that you get the help you need without having to pay 25, 30, 40,000 pounds, whatever estimate you've had from a solicitor. So I work very differently, and that's why I'm a former family lawyer, because I gave my practicing certificate up to be able to help people in this way. So that's a little bit about me, and I'll tell you more about my work later on. But let's start talking about the subject matter today. And I have got a message here. My lawyer is about to instruct my ex about selling the family home. I've moved out. It's unlikely that he will do anything. The financial disclosure hasn't happened. He's refusing to do anything. That it's quite typical in divorce proceedings to be in that position where somebody just refuses to disclose assets and they won't move forward with anything. So yeah, that can be quite common. So today it's all about the family home, and the first thing is who stays in the family home. And that's always the question when you find yourself in this position and you realize you're going to go through divorce proceedings. There's often that question, who's going to stay here? Who's going to move out? What's going to happen in the future around the family home? But in the short term, you have to think about, are you both going to live together? Are you going to live separately? And if so, who's going to move out? And it doesn't matter whether you rent your home or own your home, it's still a question that will come up. If your ex-husband or wife asks you to leave, you should make sure that you get some proper guidance before you do that. Because there can be consequences of leaving the family home, whether it's rented or owned. So there's always consequences. It's always a good idea to get advice. If you decide you want to stay in the family home and you ask your partner to leave, they might refuse to do that. They may refuse to go. And what can you do if they refuse? You do have options, but they can be limited. So often couples will decide to stay together until they have reached an agreement. And then they will, according to the agreement, so if it's that the family home is sold, they both stay there until the family home is sold. If the agreement is that their family home is transferred into one person's name, then often once you've reached that agreement, then there would be the agreement of who leaves, of that person leaving and what date before the property is transferred. So you need this short-term agreement about what happens until you have got to that final sharing of assets. Some people will find it really hard to go through a divorce while they're still living together. And obviously, the person that put in the chat box that they had moved out, it may be because it was so difficult to stay together while you were deciding everything. Sometimes your mental health can get really affected by living together, or it's unsafe for you to live together. So some people will just separate, one person will move out, and you try and get through the divorce process. If you need your ex-husband or wife to leave and they refuse, what can you do? The first option is to think about whether they've got somewhere to go. Is it a financial problem where they just don't have the money to rent? What can you do to resolve that issue if they just don't have the money to move out, if they've got no family around? If you've tried to resolve whatever it is that stops them from moving out and they still refuse to move out, you may find that you don't have many options. Unless there has been domestic abuse and you feel unsafe living with them. There is a question about whether that person could be forced to leave by you getting an occupation order through the courts, whether if there is an incident and there's been domestic abuse, whether the police would ask them to leave as well. So those things can prompt that person leaving. Otherwise, it's very difficult to force them to go, especially where the family home is either owned jointly or rented jointly. So I'm going to touch a little bit on renting a family home. It may not apply to all of you, but I'll touch on it because sometimes it is relevant. If you rent your family home, then obviously you are not the legal owner and you cannot use it as an asset to split, but you do need to decide who's keeping the tenancy and who will stay in the property. If the tenancy is in your name, then you could remain there. If the tenancy is in the other person's name, they could ask you to leave. But if you say, for example, you've got a joint tenancy, then you will need to reach an agreement about who stays there and who leaves. So that is a negotiation that you'll have to go through. If they will not leave, then it may be that you'll have to give up the tenancy and both find somewhere else to live, or you might make the decision to leave that rented property and find your own tenancy. If you are planning on doing that, make sure your name comes off that tenancy agreement, because if they refuse to pay rent, if they're late on paying rent, then you might be liable because your name is on the tenancy agreement. So you can transfer the tenancy agreement from joint names to one person's name, or you might just need to give up that tenancy and both move out. So depending on how you can reach an agreement, there is still something to agree around a rented house. It's not as complicated, but obviously there are some decisions to be made. Usually, most people own their family home when they're going through divorce proceedings. And so this is the most valuable asset that you're going to have. Sometimes pensions will be worth more than the family home, but usually this is the asset that will have the most value. It's also has an emotional attachment to it. So people often don't want to leave the family home. And, this is where obviously issues can start, where both of you want to keep the family home, stay in the family home. It doesn't matter whose name the property is in, because all your assets will be in the pot. Most of your assets will be in the pots. Doesn't matter whose name. So everything that's in your name, everything that's in the other person's name, and everything in joint names will go into the pot, unless there's a reason why it shouldn't go in the pot. And I won't talk about that in too much detail because it can be quite complicated. And then we look at what the division of assets will be. And usually it's based on needs of each person and children. So if you've got children, you might look at housing needs. What are your housing needs? What's the other person's needs? And what are the children's needs? If the children will be going between the two of you, and you've got two children, then it's likely that your housing need is for a 3-bedroom property, same for the other person. And so we have to look at how we meet that housing need. We have to look at how we meet your income needs so that you can afford the expenditure that you have monthly. You might need to have some extra money left aside as savings, and you need to have money on retirement. So when we're looking at your pot, we're looking at all of these things, not just the family home. Really important that you understand that your settlement has to be based on everything, not just one asset. Lots of people will call me and they will say, I just want to split the family home. So what do we do about that? Do we just go 50-50 on the family home? And when I say, what about everything else? They'll say, no, we just want to split the family home. And it may be that it's just the family home that's being shared, but all the assets have to go into the pot. And then we look at, are you just keeping the money in your bank account? Are you keeping your pension? Are you keeping your investments? Is the other person doing the same? And it's just the family home that we have to look at. But the split of the family home will be based on what else you've got. And so we can't look at it in isolation. So that's the first thing to really know about the family home. If the family home is not in your name, don't think that you don't have an entitlement to an interest in it. You do if that's been your marital home and you've lived there as husband and wife, or wife and wife, or husband and husband. Ultimately, that is your family home and you have an entitlement. You may need to protect yourself by getting a matrimonial homes right notice on it so that that person whose name it's in can't remortgage it, can't sell it without your consent. And there's no clear-cut answer about the division, even once we know what's in the pot. Is it 50-50? And I do a whole talk about what is a fair split, so I won't go into that in so much detail today, but are we looking at a 50-50 split of everything? Are we looking at 60-40? There's no set formula on how you split your assets. The courts will give us some guidelines, and so we use those guidelines to decide how your assets are split. We use case law to give us an idea of how judges are actually looking at these cases. But it depends on the circumstances of your marriage. There's no exact formula. So to work out somebody's settlement, it takes quite a bit of time because we've got to do a lot of research, get a lot of information, find out the circumstances about both parties and the children, and then start piecing together how this works. And obviously we put together a proposal, and that's something that both of you would need to agree on. If you can't agree, then it would go to court. So that's a little bit about how we look at settlements, because today, although we're looking at just the family home, we generally can't look at it in isolation. But the question on what happens to the family home, we look at these factors. Are there any children under 18, and what are their needs? So they may have a physical disability or illness, mental health issue. So what are the children's needs? They need to be close to their school. They may need a bedroom each. They may have other needs. So we need to look at that in detail. Your ages, the length of the marriage, value of your assets that you have, including pensions, both of your earning capacity, what you've contributed to the marriage, each of you. Things like negative conduct of the parties. So if there's been any extreme behavior that's relevant to the finances, and generally your needs as well. So we look at all of this and we put children as priority, so we meet their needs first. And then once we've got this information, we can then start looking at what is going to happen to each asset. So the first thing, obviously, the family home. What can we do with the family home? And there's a few different things that you can do. The first is that the house is transferred into one of your names. If it's a joint property, you might decide that that person gets it. And the other person could receive a lump sum instead or get other assets. So sometimes I see couples saying, I'll keep the family home. You've got a big pension, so you keep your pension. I don't want that. I'll keep the family home instead. So it may be that a couple does that. You could sell the house and you could agree how you split the proceeds. There is a cost, obviously, to selling a property. There will be fees. And then if you're buying properties, then there'll be fees with that as well. And you then need to also agree how you will share proceeds. Is it going to be one person gets a lump sum of 100,000 and the other person gets everything else? Are you looking at percentages? And that's usually how we do it. It's a percentage. Is it 50% each? Is it 60-40? What's the reason for that split? It may be that the house is too big for one person or unaffordable for one person on their own. So either of you can't stay in the house because it's just unaffordable, or it might not be the right size for you. So then selling the property might be a good option, especially if the children have left home and the house is too big. It may be that you take that decision to sell the property. And the benefits of selling is that it gives you a clean break, and then both parties are free to decide where they live. You might decide that you want to rent. You might decide you want to move abroad. And obviously that gives you both freedom. You're not stuck in that location. You could buy a property with the funds. You might decide that you don't want to buy a property and you're happy to live with family or live with your friends, or you've got a lot more freedom. Sometimes neither of these options work because selling the house isn't an option because what you would get from selling isn't enough to buy. It may be that transferring a property into one person's name, again, isn't an option because you can't get a mortgage that's big enough on your own. What do you do then? Where do you go where transferring the house isn't an option and selling the house doesn't give you enough? And these situations arise generally where a couple will have young children and the house is just the right size and in the right location for school, and also your other support network is there as well. And so you might decide, if you're the main carer, that you want to stay in the house because it's the right decision for the children and you're the main carer. It may be that transferring it into your name isn't possible. So what do you do? Sometimes couples will have this situation where they will keep the house in joint names and one person will live there with the children until the youngest child is 18. And at that point, the property would be transferred into the name. When the youngest child is 18, the property is either transferred into the name of the person living there, or it is sold and the proceeds divided according to the split that was agreed. If you are the person living in the property and you decide to stay there, then it's likely that you would need to raise funds to give the other person some money so that they could buy. If your children are, say, 3 and 4, that person's got 15 years to wait before they can access that lump sum, or the property gets sold and they get some money at that point. So it is an option. It's called a Mesha order. And that is an option the courts will use. They don't like it too much if it's possible because it keeps you linked. And what we're trying to do through your financial settlement is to separate you financially. Often it's not possible to do that. And if it isn't possible, then of course a Mesha order could be the right answer for you. But do let me know if you've got questions around this, because it can be a little bit tricky. If you've got limited assets, a Mesha order could be a really good option. It gives stability to the children. It means that you've got housing for the children and the assets could go up in value. So if your youngest is 3 and you're waiting 15 years to sell the property, the asset's gone up in value. So the other person who's not living there will get a percentage on sale, and at least they're getting a percentage of the increased value. So they get a better lump sum at that point. It binds you together still, and you will still need to have discussions around mortgages, fixed deals, and things like that. So there will still need to be discussions around the family home. So that isn't fantastic. And the courts will not give a Mesha order unless they can see there isn't another option. But when you're looking at your options, the things to look at is to think about your mortgage capacity, for example. If you have a good mortgage capacity, if you're able to raise a good amount of money by way of mortgage, and it is affordable for you to pay those monthly installments, it might be that you keep the family home, the mortgage is transferred into your name, the house is transferred into your name, and you are able to raise some funds to give the other person a lump sum so they can buy or rent or make decisions for them. It may be that the other person is in a better financial position to raise a mortgage. If your mortgage in the family home is small, and actually you decide that that small mortgage you can take on, then it might make sense for the other person who's got a bigger mortgage capacity to go out and buy a property. So we have to look at different elements. Your income, your mortgage capacity, stability for the children, who's the main carer. All of these things would help me decide whether it is fair for one person to stay in the family home. And as I said, don't look at the family home in isolation. You need to look at it as part of a bigger picture. And obviously, I help my clients work through settlement. So if they say to me their priority is to stay in the family home, we build the proposal based on that first, to make sure it meets the needs of the children, meets the needs of the adults, and what's the other person going to do for housing as well. And we have to consider affordability in all of this, because there is no point coming to a settlement around the family home that really isn't affordable. So think about that as well. When I was going through my divorce, I wanted to keep the family home and I was adamant that I would do that. But I very quickly realized that I would probably need to do 2 jobs to be able to pay that mortgage as well as all the other bills. My ex-husband wasn't working, so I wasn't getting any child maintenance, and I was looking after 3 children on my own. And I fought this within myself. I wanted to keep it. It was a good house. I knew that the value would go up substantially. So I really wanted to keep it, and I decided that was my priority. And I very quickly realized that I couldn't afford it. I couldn't manage 2 jobs and 3 children. That just isn't possible to do. And so, although the family home was going to be mine in the settlement, I actually sold the family home and bought something smaller with a smaller mortgage, and it gave me more stability and more peace, less stress, and obviously managed to bring up the children from that place of stability and affordability, which was much better for me at that time, even though I wanted to keep the family home. So you need to make a decision that is right for you. You also need to make a decision that's affordable for you. So think about what the decision is for you. I'm happy to have a look at your questions around things that you're thinking of. So put that in the chat box and I'll definitely come back to those. It's obviously better to come to an agreement with your ex-partner, either yourselves or using a professional, it doesn't matter. If you can't get to an agreement around the family home or around anything about the finances or even the children and the plans for the children, then you've got different options. One is mediation. The other is getting family and friends to help you reach an agreement. And also court proceedings could be an option. Could you keep yourself on mute, please? Thank you. Yeah, so you've got different options there to get to either an agreement or get the court to make a decision for you. And court proceedings are difficult, they're stressful. So you don't want to take that step easily. It's a last resort, really. But it's there if you cannot reach an agreement. If you are being sensible, you are saying this is a fair agreement. I need to keep the family home because the children are young and I'm their main carer, etc. And then if the other person just refuses, it may be that court proceedings aren't necessary. But obviously, it's quite stressful and it's quite expensive to go through that court process. So obviously, I would need you to think about that carefully, but sometimes it is absolutely necessary. So if it becomes necessary, then that's the step you need to take. The court will not just look at the family home in isolation either. They will look at the whole settlement. So you kind of need to look at the family home and see how it all works out. What is that person getting? What are you getting? Is it fair? Is the bottom line fair, ultimately? So that's how it works when we are looking at the family home. And I hope that makes sense. And I'll have a look at your questions as well. I'm sure you've got some. Yes, there's a few questions there. And feel free, while I am just taking you through a little bit about how I work, feel free to put the questions in the chat box so that I can come to them. I'm just going to share my screen now so that I can take you through this, and I hope you can see that okay. I don't think you can you? Have a look. Might need to mess with this a little bit just to make sure you can see it. Hopefully you can see that. It's coming up on my screen strange. I don't know why that is, but hopefully you can see that okay. Yeah, let me know. Let me know if that looks fine. Okay, so what do? I have this fixed fee program. It is there to provide you with support and guidance. I am not acting as your lawyer. What I am acting as is your guide and your support. I am there to explain things to you, to tell you the law, help you with proposals. I help you with your divorce application, the legal process, the practical process, and every other question that could come up for you. We are talking about so many different things. So yesterday I was dealing with a non-molestation order and bail conditions for a client. We could be talking about arrangements for the children. We could be talking about finances. So anything that comes up for you is included. We discussed that because this isn't just a legal process. This is a process that is so all-encompassing for you that you need to get more support than just somebody saying these are your legal rights. Because where do you go with that? So I help you with correspondence, documents, applications, divorce applications. We look at your finances. We're doing financial disclosure, looking at proposals, negotiating. I'm not negotiating for you, but I am there to support you while you are negotiating. It comes with a supportive community and other experts as well. And the transformations that we achieve in that space have been amazing. So I've been really lucky to be able to help people in a way that is affordable, but also covers everything you need, really. We're talking about mortgages and affordability and financial products. I'm not there to give you advice on financial products, but I might say you've got the option of an interest-only mortgage or a repayment mortgage here on your family home. And then at least you can go and get the advice from a mortgage broker as to which one is right for you. But we talk about everything. A little bit about one of my clients who recently finished working with me. Anika is not her name, obviously, because I wouldn't want to share her name, but she believes she saved £170,000 through working with me and a whole load of stress. She's got a young child and she works full time, but she does earn less than her ex-husband. The family home was the main asset, even though there were pensions as well. But the family home was worth the highest amount. And when she came to me before she'd even told her ex-husband that she was going to go through this process. And she was really scared. There'd been domestic abuse. Her confidence was low. She felt really uncertain about what to do, where to go. Her absolute priority was keeping the family home, and she just couldn't see how maybe it was possible. And the other thing was she just didn't have the money to afford huge legal fees. So she was trying to do it herself, but from reading on Google, from looking up everything, it was just too confusing. She couldn't do it. So this was what she said when we finished working together. I had a call with her, and these are the things that she talked about. That we met in 2017, and strangely enough, at an informal event, and she kept seeing me around. And because this was on her mind, it obviously resonated with her. She really wanted to do it within an affordable budget. And she reached out and we started work together. And it was great because we did lots of work before she said a word. And actually, that was really important just because she got clarity. She wasn't as scared. She knew that we'd done so much work together that I understood her position, and she was then ready with my support to take that step. And we talked about how she would tell him, the safety mechanism she'd put in place, what to do as soon as she'd said it. So different things. We formulated this plan. But we also had this real vision of where she was going, what her priorities were, what her life would look like on the other side. And I often brought her back to this when she was struggling, because that vision is strong and you need to remember where you're going when things get difficult. And we really worked on this step-by-step process. She was doing it herself, but I was there guiding her and supporting her. We did her divorce application. We had that ready before we even told him. We talked about how to tell him. After she'd told him, she said that this application would come. She submitted it. We started working on financial disclosure, got information from him, even though he was quite hesitant in providing it. We got as much as we could from him and worked on proposals that would actually help her stay in the family home. We came up with quite a few, and then we decided on one, and she put that forward to him. So from that point of view, she had an idea of what she was going to put forward, and we really understood the benefits of it, the affordability of it before she said it. Through the financial disclosure, we did finally get as much information as possible from him. Not everything, mind you, but as much as we could. And then when we started negotiating, or when she started negotiating, it brings up a lot of emotions. And there was often times that she wanted to just go to the higher end of our proposal, the band that we'd talked about. She wanted to give a bigger lump sum. And I had to keep reining her back, saying, I know you've just offered him X. Now sit with that. Don't jump to offering him more straight away. So I was able to balance her emotions. I was able to keep holding her back, because at this point, it's just so difficult, the negotiation. So I kept holding her back. They finally got to an agreement. There was lots of little things that we needed to negotiate and agree on. We did the broad brush agreement and then negotiated all the small things around that agreement and a plan for their child. And then we looked at the legal documents as well. She completed her divorce in 7 months of working with me, so she was quite lucky to get that done. At that point, she hadn't submitted all her financial consent order to the court, but she had it ready and she was going to submit that at the right time. They reached an agreement, but it saved her £150,000. And she says to me that because I held her back, she managed to save that money. She also believes she saved 20,000 approximately on legal fees. Obviously, we don't know what her legal fees would have been. She believes they would have been quite high because she talked a lot and we worked on a lot of things. But the family home was transferred into her name within those 7 months. So she was lucky she managed to get the transfer done. She asked me to come to her family home because she'd done some work on it herself. And I went to see it, and she was really proud of what she had achieved and where she was in her life. So I was so happy to be in that space with her to congratulate her in where she'd got to. And she was the main carer of their child and made sure that she continued that contact that the child was having with dad as well. And she encouraged that, so that was good. Her view was that although she was scared, she managed to amicably agree on all the different elements of her divorce and stay in the house, which was what her priority was. And these are the kind of things that she said about me. I'm nicer than what you would expect from a lawyer, which is very kind of her to say. I added therapy, and obviously I'm not a therapist, so I can't say I add therapy. This is what she felt. But there's some emotional support which can really make a difference. The back and forth calls and intense time meant a lot, and she respected that. It works. Do your preparation. Follow the steps that I give you. On every call, she wanted to make it count. She made the best of it. It does work, and it can work within the time frame, but you've got to do the work too. I'll empower you, but you've got to be ready and have that clear vision of where you're going. And these are the kind of things we work on. So obviously you've got the program there. I've told you a bit about it and how a client worked through the program and what her steps were. Feel free to book a call to have a chat to find out more about the program if that is what you are interested in. I can discuss with you whether it's the right step for you. And the cost is always fixed, so happy to say that as well. It's £2,500 currently. It's a fixed fee for 6 months, and I don't look at the amount of time we've spent together. It's just you get my support for that time. I have a book which you can find on Amazon. It's called The Divorce Planner, and it takes you step by step through the process as well, with downloadable resources and checklists and things to fill in. And these are the links to get in contact with me. But Nelma, can you put them in the chat box so that everyone has them? Okay, so I'm just going to have a look at your questions now. Let's see what you guys have been saying. I hope you found that useful, and it would be great to know your thoughts on how you found today, because I try and cover as much as possible, but it is really tough to get such a complicated topic into a short space of time. Can both, and I'm just going to look at the direct messages and your messages that you've put in the chat box as well. Can both move to rent on an agreement until financial hearing is done? Specifically, other person showed himself in debt and came back home with an occupation order. I want to move out with my child. What legal consequences can be? Okay, there's quite a lot there, because the other person has got an occupation order against you. You're saying, I want to move out. If they've got an occupation order, then you have to move out as soon as you're served with that order. So I wonder whether you've got an occupation order or something else, but I'm going to assume there is an occupation order in place because that's what you seem to suggest. I want to move out with my child. What are the legal consequences? A really interesting question. And lots of people will ask me this before they decide to take that step of moving out. What are the legal consequences? Well, that depends on whose name the property is in. If it's in joint names and you move out and you're renting elsewhere, you don't lose your legal right to the property. Your name is on it. It can't be taken off easily. So you don't need to worry that you lose your legal interest. They can't sell it without you. They can't remortgage it without you. The consequences might be that they change the locks and they won't let you back in. So you decide in 6 months' time, actually, I want to move back in. I've run out of money. I can't rent anymore. I need to move back in. They might be able to stop you. They could get the police round and the police would say, who lives here? Who's been living here? And they might say, I've been living here. And so the police will ask you to sort things out legally and try not to move back in because that could be a public disorder. If the property is not in your joint names, if it's in the other person's sole name and they're living there, then it's really hard for you to move back in because if the police get called, the legal name is for the other person. You don't lose your matrimonial interest in the property though, because even though it's not in your name, if you are married to that person and you've lived there as your family home, then you still have an interest in the property. So by moving out, you don't lose that, but you might not be able to return. So hopefully that helps. Can the other party claim for future earnings potential? X is self-employed and likely to declare everything fully. It's difficult to answer that because I don't know enough, but I'll give you a general answer. Your earning today is relevant. So sometimes I come across people that are working part-time because their children are young and the plan is that they would go full-time, say in a year's time. So in that situation, today we can only look at your earning potential now, your earnings now, but you've got a potential to increase your income. So that has to be relevant in the when we're looking at a settlement. Similarly, I had a case where a client, his earnings, it was a couple, but the other person, his earnings were about 200,000. But he was in the process of getting some venture capital for his business. And the projections were that he would be earning 300,000 and taking a profit share of this company that suddenly was about to have a massive capital injection. So we actually looked at the future earning potential because it was relevant. It was going to make a big difference on affordability. And so it was relevant. And it is normally relevant. If you know that your ex is likely to get a massive income in a year's time, 2 years' time, then yes, it would be relevant, especially if you could see the increase year on year. So if that person has had a 20% increase in income for the last 10 years, then it's likely that that might continue. If there is a non-molestation occupation order in place, can the home rights be removed? It depends on how this is working. So say, for example, the property is in your ex's name and you've put a matrimonial homes right notice in place and then they get an occupation order to stay there. Your matrimonial homes right notice should not be removed because that protects you from the other person selling or remortgaging that property. If they remortgage the property, they take all the money out and suddenly the money's disappeared, you're losing a lot of assets. So I wouldn't remove that matrimonial homes right notice until you've got an agreement, the court has stamped that agreement as an order, and then you are doing the transfers. So, for example, if that property is being sold, once it's sold, you will need to take your name off it, that notice of it, because you can't sell it with that notice on there. But I would wait until you're almost through the sale process. Leave that as the last thing you do. I have a non-molestation for me and my child and regulated occupation order against my husband. Don't know what you mean by regulated. He came back home showing negative fund and homeless on certain occupation order. Normally you wouldn't, okay. Let's see what the rest of it is. He didn't apply child arrangement. I'm going to put my child all day, 7 days on Form E. Will he has to apply for child arrangements order if he wants to keep child? Child doesn't want to be with him. Well, you need to reach an agreement around the child. So I'm guessing you're asking me a question around the child arrangements. He doesn't, I mean, you need to reach an agreement. The law assumes as parents, you will know what's best for your children and you will reach an agreement. So the Form E isn't necessarily about children, but obviously it's relevant because if you've got your child 7 days a week, then your expenses are going to be higher. I hope the other person pays you child maintenance to help you with those expenses. But usually there's an element of contact with the other person. You're talking about your child staying with you for 7 days. Is the other person not having any contact? If they are, what level of contact is it? Have you reached an agreement? You've got a non-molestation order, and that might mean that there is no contact. It might be supervised contact. So I don't know the details to answer that question properly. But if the non-molestation order says no contact at all, and you've been given this, then it's likely the child will be with you 7 days. If he wants to have contact, then yes, he will need to make a child arrangements application to the court for the judge to decide whether contact should happen. But bearing in mind, if there's an injunction in place, it might be unlikely that he gets it, but it depends on the circumstances. Your child is 11 and already knows that what they want. And obviously the child's wishes and feelings are taken into account, but they don't always know what's best for them. So a court would look at the situation around what is in the best interest of that child. But they take the wishes and feelings into account. And the thing with all of these, there's never a straight answer. It always depends on your circumstances. In all these, while the other half is not agreeing to divorce, I am taking a step and planning to move with my mum, who lives alone. I am hoping that then be like a formal separation as a start. Yes, if the other person is refusing to separate or divorce, you can still take steps. You don't need their permission to take this step. And I often see this where one person is saying, I want to get divorced, and the other person is saying, I don't want a divorce, you can't force it. And actually, you can force it, because if you desperately believe the marriage is over, then it's very hard for you to stay in that marriage. You could move out, as you're suggesting, you're planning on moving in with your mum. So then obviously you're separated. If the property is in joint names, your legal right is there. And even if it isn't in joint names, you may have an interest because you live there as husband and wife. So you're not losing your interest by moving out, but obviously being able to get back in might be difficult if they've changed the locks, if they just refuse you back in later on. But you can get through the divorce process, even if they're not in agreement. You can get through financial settlement as well if they're not in agreement. Otherwise, what happens is you're held hostage in that marriage until that person agrees. So the court doesn't want you to be in that position. They can make it harder for you, but they can't stop you. So hopefully that helps. And you don't need a formal separation. The fact you can be separated and living in the same house. If you tell the other person, we're not together, our marriage is over, I'm going to start divorce proceedings, you can live in the same house and be doing that. You could move out and still be and be separated. So there's different ways to be separated. You don't have to move out. Okay, I've got lots of direct messages, so you won't see them in the chat box, but I'll just read them out. So the other half can live in the family home, but I need to take this step, and sorry about, oh, hold on a second, that's just jumped. Let's go back to that question. So the other half can live in the family home, but I need to take this step and worry about the family home later, because once I'm away, I guess I can be considered separated. You can be considered separated living in the same house. So lots of people live in the same house. They tell the other person that the marriage is over, and that I am going to move out, or we need to decide what happens with the finances. You can't start court proceedings to settle finances unless you've got divorce proceedings. So you can be in the same house and start divorce proceedings and then sort out your finances as well. So you don't have to be away to be considered separated. Thanks for your advice. You're always very helpful. Your story is inspiring. Thank you. Thank you for your time. I need to contact you and explain my current situation. If you think you can help me, I would like to enroll on your program or use your services the best possible way. And to the person who sent me that direct message, obviously book a call. Let's see what is right for you. And that's the important thing. We have to find what's right for you. Everybody has different needs, and what you might need to what somebody else needs might be different. So feel free to book a call if you would like to find out if the program is right for you. Okay, so do let me know what you thought of the session. It is a difficult one because there's so many things that can happen, but it's always useful to do the questions at the end as well, because that can give you more specific help. Thank you very much, and it does give some confidence. Good, I'm glad you got some confidence, hopefully a bit of clarity as well. Okay, so I'm going to leave that there. Feel free to keep putting in any feedback that you've got on the session. I will come off camera and I'll be on mute, so you can carry on putting your feedback there. And if you've got any questions, feel free to put them there as well. Brilliant. Nice to see you all. I hope to see you next week. I don't know what I'm talking about next week. We always have these talks scheduled, but I'm sure Nelma will put it in the chat box what next week's talk is about, because he's a bit more organized on these things than me. So Nelma, if you're happy, would you just put, oh, there you go. You've done it already. It's all about income and expenditure and why that is important, and how to track that as well. So really interesting session. Be great to see you there. And